Greetings. My name is Jalandra A. Davis, otherwise known as Mommy Melusine. I am a writer, scholar, educator, dancer, mermaid enthusiast, and all around creative. Welcome to the Merwomanist podcast, where we talk about Black mermaid lore, fantasy, spirituality, and aquatic culture. Dive in and enjoy. Greetings, and welcome back to the Merwomanist podcast. And this is what I hope is going to be a quick episode. I know I say that every time, but I really want this one to be quick because I also want to record my New Year's episode. I am talking to you now, New Year's Eve, but who knows when it's actually going to go up. I'm finally going to be wrapping up Blackoween. I know. Halloween, Blackoween was in October, but look, it is what it is. I just want to wrap up some of those reads. Also talk about some fantasy, adult fantasy that I've been reading for the last few weeks that I have been off of work. I'm actually took a work break this year, not as long as I wanted to, but actually took a real work break. And I have a few more days before I plan on getting seriously back to work, where I'm going to try to knock out some more books. And I'm going to talk about my TBR for the month of January. So, my book folks, this is for you. The books that I'm going to talk about today, as far as my wrap up, are Desiree S. Evans and Sarah Sika J. Fennell. I am so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. But those are editors of a horror anthology called The Black Girl Survives in This One. Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians. N.K. Jemison's The Inheritance Trilogy, the one book that I have finished so far. It's a trilogy, but there's 4 books. How is that? And Wicked. I just finished reading Wicked yesterday. So have a lot of thoughts about that. I'm going to start with the simplest. I have been meaning to read both this and another horror anthology that I'll talk about in my TBR for a while now. This is The Black Girl Survives, and it is a collection of short fiction about Black women with Black women as protagonists. And the conceit of the collection is the Black girl is going to survive. You can go into each story knowing the Black girl is going to survive. Really cool conceit, really great way to organize the collection. I look at this as sort of the spiritual follow-up to Kenitra Brooks' edited collection, Sycorax's Daughters, which is another Black horror collection that I still have not finished because there are so many stories in it, and I finally kind of decided to move on. But I see it as a spiritual follow-up to that collection. Some things that I like about this, very tight, very concise. All of the stories are pretty short. So even if you're not loving a story, which there were some stories I didn't love, the whole thing moves really quickly. I really love the fact that it's Black horror about Black girls that's very distinctive in its Blackness, but not necessarily every story focused on a racial justice issue or a monster as metaphor for white supremacy kind of setup. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that kind of thematic in Black horror. I just feel like it's become really dominant in Black horror, with the monster or the horror always serving as a one-to-one metaphor for white supremacy or racism. There are a few stories maybe that do that, but for the most part, they're just slice of life horror stories. Ghost Light, that was one of my favorites, by Erin E. Adams, and it's about a Black theater girl who runs the crew. She runs the play, and there is a ghost in the theater where she is running a play. So as a Black theater girl, and grew up a musical theater girl, I love theater, I love live productions. It was just fun to read a scary, spooky story with a Black theater girl at the center. Another one of my favorites was The Brides of Devil's Bayou by Desiree S. Evans. I really love Louisiana Bayou set it stories. They always are so culturally rich. There's always so much lore and spirituality. My mother's side of the family is from the Louisiana Bayou area. And even though I don't, in terms of my ancestry genealogy, there hasn't much that's been passed down to me, but I am always just really interested in that cultural context. So this story is about a girl who generations of the women in her family are cursed. I don't want to give away too much about the story, but they are cursed to be taken as a bride by a devil or demon creature that lives in the bayou on their 19th birthday or around their 19th birthday. And every generation a girl from this family disappears on her 19th birthday into the swamp. That was one of my favorites, really cool story. There's a story called TMI. This is by Zakiya Delilah Harris. And it's hard to talk about this one out without giving too much away. I like this story because it's about writers. It's about a girl who wants to be a writer, who goes to see her favorite writer speak and ends up accidentally taking that writer's flip phone. And I really don't want to say anything else, but creepiness ensues from the possession of this phone. Quiniums for Grenium by Brittany Morris is a story about a creepy MLM. And I just think that's really cool because I know MLMs aren't at all specific to Black people. I actually know a lot of white people, especially housewives, get into MLMs. And MLMs, multi-level marketing companies. So something like Amway, what is it called? Nutralife, right? But I also think that MLMs, I just think they tend to target like marginalized people, poor people, working class people. And throughout my young adult life, I joined or almost joined several of these types of companies and was constantly getting recruited to these types of companies by people I went to high school with. Because one of the things they tell you is just to call everyone in your phone and try to get them to a meeting. So it's a horror story about this creepy MLM that this girl's sister gets involved in, and it's very culty and it's very creepy. And I just hilarious because that really is when you go around some of these organizations, some of these people, the way they talk, there's kind of a language that they use. There is something very creepy about it. So I think it was a very clever idea. And it's an example of a story that is Black without it being about racial oppression, but something that I feel like probably a lot of people recognize. But I think that Black people, knowing how so many people end up getting involved in these kind of businesses trying to make some money, is something a lot of people will be familiar with. Black Girl Nature Group. This is by Maika Mulite and Marissa Mulite. So it looks like it's by a sister pair. I think it's cool that this was written by sisters and it is about Black girls who go on a nature hike into the woods. So we know whenever people go into the woods, crazy things ensue. And one of the things I liked about this was they had a presence of ancestral magic. The Skittering Thing by Monica Brashears. And this one is by the same author as one of my reads on my last horror wrap up, Monica Brashears, who wrote House of Cotton. I had a very mixed review, mixed feelings about House of Cotton, but I definitely felt like she's a brilliant, really talented writer, very good at beauty and atmosphere. So I was excited to read more of her work. And this story didn't disappoint. I really enjoyed this story. Very, very, very creepy. Very creepy. And it looks like my next favorite that I circled is Fox Hunt by Charlotte Nicole Davis. We have a queer, I believe. If she wasn't queer, she was a gender nonconforming protagonist who ends up taking part in a very strange and dangerous ritual at her new high school. And I won't say too much else about that, but really good, really good. And I thought it was a great choice to close the collection. So, yeah, I really recommend. It's a quick read because the stories are short. They're about the same length across and really fun because you do know that every protagonist is going to survive, even though it's a really cool conceit and way to organize a collection. And I think it is a way to deal with some of the tensions around Black horror, where when you're reading Black characters in these terrible, horrible situations, particularly if they have some kind of relationship to racism or racial violence, it can be re-traumatizing for readers and viewers. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about in my work is how do we play in these kinds of genres, like thrillers and horror, without sort of re-traumatizing Black audiences. And so I think that setting up from the beginning that the Black people are going to survive is a great way to do that. However, it does reduce the tension and the suspense and the fear a little bit if you know that the protagonist of the story is going to survive, right? If there's no question about that. So it makes the authors have to work harder to make the story scary. And I think some of the authors in the collection were more successful at doing that than others. But it's a great idea, great book, and I definitely recommend. I also read Percival Everett's The Trees. I read that as one of the group reads for Black Wing because I wanted to participate in the live shows. I actually didn't end up being able to really make most of the live shows. I found it free as an audiobook and I could not resist a free book. And I listened to it on 2 times speed. I think that might have compromised my listening experience a bit. But it is a lynching story. So basically, what is happening in the book is that white men are being murdered. And I believe, at least at first, the first men who were killed have connections or are part of the family of the men who murdered Emmett Till. And so every time one of these murders happens, there is a body of a Black man that is found with the victims. This is something that goes on and on and on throughout the book. And eventually you find out it's part of like a larger thing that's happening. I don't know how much to say sometimes when talking about horror without giving it away. So I enjoyed it. It felt a little dry to me. It's definitely a detective procedural. And sometimes with a detective procedural with multiple points of view, I feel like I don't get as much as I want in terms of the interiority of the characters. I really like a thriller or a detective story where there is something happening in the investigators or the detective's life that's sort of parallel to what is happening in the case they're investigating. I like a more interior focused story. That's just sort of my taste. And it was more kind of jumping around different points of view and more about what was happening than I felt it was about the characters. But I think it was pretty good. And that's one that I don't have my Black Wing stuff in front of me to talk about the prompts, but that was one of the recommendations. And that was a recommendation for a book by a Black man and a book with some kind of historical resonance or historical significance. So there was a lot of tiebacks to historical lynching cases. Also, Joe's Library. So that would be probably a good book for Joe's Library. Another book I read, which would count for Joe's Library in the Black Wing readathon, is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And the prompt that this will fit is a book by an Indigenous man. And I've been wanting to read this for a while. I've heard really good things about it. One of my best reads of the year. It's right up there. Reformatory is probably one of my favorite reads of the year, if not the favorite. But it's right up there with Reformatory. Just gruesome, deliciously gruesome, deranged horror. And it was just so good. It's just so good. I'm trying to think, what can I say if it's about without sort of giving away things? It's about 4 Blackfoot men who they live on a reservation. They go hunting during the winter time and they kill a bunch of elk. And I don't want to say too much because what actually happens in that scene is sort of slowly revealed throughout the book. And one of the things I like about the book is it's so deep in the culture and it's not explaining things to you, but you're still able to infer things even if you're outside of the culture. So I was able to infer that in the process, in the way that they hunted these elk, in the way that they killed them, that there was some kind of taboo that was committed, right? Something you're not supposed to do, even in the process of hunting. And it unleashes a vengeful spirit that hunts down these men 10 years later and starts killing them, pursuing them and killing them one by one and destroying their lives before it kills them. Woo! This is one of the scariest, most horrendous, and also the most strangely beautiful things I have ever read. It's so good. It's so hard to explain why it's so good. One of the things I've realized about my reading is I do read mostly female authors and mostly female protagonists. I'm a very woman identified woman. And I'm like, let me challenge myself to read some men or start reading men again. And there's definitely something that's different about reading men. There's just a different way that I feel like male characters relate to emotion and their interiority, that sometimes I feel a lot of distance, which I think is why sometimes I have trouble connecting. But I felt really deeply connected through this book. And I think it just speaks a lot to manhood and marginalized manhood. In this case, it's Indian. They call themselves Indian in the book, but I guess I would say Native American or indigenous men, how difficult it is for them to live out their ideas of manhood, their norms of manhood in a reservation where they don't have the access to the space, the resources by which they can be men in terms of their historical and cultural context. One of the reasons they're hunting where they're not supposed to be hunting is because there's only so much land, and a large portion of the land is set aside for the elders. So these young men are sort of literally pinned in and frustrated in these variety of ways. And that just plays out in a way that really ends up destroying their lives. It's just an amazing book. I have another book by Stephen Graham Jones that I bought a long time ago that I haven't read, The Last Final Girl. So I'm really excited to read that now that I've read one of his books. So highly recommend, one of the best horror books I've ever read. Oh, and one more thing I want to say about this and why I liked it so much. There is no white gaze anywhere in this book. And I think I've been reading a lot of Black YA fantasy lately and participating in some conversations in BookTube and online about a lot of the Black fantasy lately, and feeling like it definitely is trying to position itself to appeal to a broader audience. So there's a lot of explaining of things. There's a lot of Black characters that are sort of isolated in a white world. And I think some of this is literally because this is more of a reality for young Black people now than maybe it was when I was growing up in integrated environments, growing up in these more isolated environments, more further away from community, from Black communities. So people should be able to write to their realities, and I think there is a reality. But I think some of it does have to do with marketing and publishing and who the perceived audience is for everything, including for the literature of Black people and people of color. So one of the things about this book is that there are some things that are really, really, really troubling to read for me as a person who I feel like I don't read a lot of Indigenous authors. I plan to do more, but I haven't experienced a lot of Native American characters. So to see such horrendous things happen, it's like, wow. And it really inspires me to broaden my reading so that I can experience more things of more characters. But that the author wasn't afraid to back off of what he wanted to do in terms of a spectacularly horror, suspense, creepy novel because of worrying about the gaze of others. I don't know if that makes sense, but read it. It's just an amazing book. Such an amazing book. Very masterful. I could not, especially towards the end, I could not put this book down. Okay, so another book that I read recently is the first book in the Inheritance trilogy, which is a trilogy, but why do I feel like there's four books? Because there are. They still call it the trilogy, but there are four books: The 100,000 Kingdoms, The Broken Kingdoms, The Kingdom of Gods, The Awakened Kingdom. So I finished The 100,000 Kingdoms, book one of the Inheritance trilogy. This is by N.K. Jemison. I brought this whole thing, which I think is a mistake because it's so intimidating to look at the whole thing and you just feel like you'll never finish. What I've been doing lately in terms of my reading since I've been off of work is just to focus on one book at a time, because one of the things I'm kind of bad about, particularly when I'm purchasing books and buying books, is start reading several books at the same time and end up abandoning a lot of them or having to start over because I put it down, then I need to pick it up. So one of the things I've been doing lately is just one book at a time, one fiction book at a time, one academic book at a time, and just read it until it's done. That sounds so simple, but I really do read multiple books, and I used to be able to do that and still finish them, but my brain just doesn't seem to have the ability to do it anymore. My goal is at least 50 pages a day. I usually do more like 150 since I've been on vacation, but my minimum page I try to hit is 50 pages. So I just read The 100,000 Kingdoms. Amazing, amazing. I did end up starting this book over again a couple of times, just like I have pretty much with every N.K. Jemison book that I've read. And it's not because her books are not enjoyable. Her world building is so dense. Her worlds are not recognizable worlds where you can just kind of jump in there and infer things because you've seen a world like that before. The world building is just very unique, it's very complex. And sometimes it just takes me a few reads to start to kind of understand the world and understand what's going on. This is an author who really, really, really trusts her readers' intelligence. Sometimes when I read N.K. Jemison, I start having some doubts, not doubts about my intelligence. I know I'm smart, but just sometimes I don't know what's going on and I have to go back and start again. So I read this kind of slowly and luxuriously. It is about a young woman named Yang. I think I'm saying that right. And she is the daughter of the former princess of the 100,000 Kingdoms. So this is a kingdom that's not necessarily one ancient nation, it's an empire. The Arameri are an imperial family that has managed to conquer all of these hundreds of kingdoms because they have the power over these sort of semi-divine beings, these former gods who, because they lost a war among the gods and they lost a war to the sort of one god of their religion, which is the Sky Father, these other gods have been bound to be enslaved to the Arameri. And so this imperial family is able to use this power of these god like beings that are enslaved to them in order to sort of conquer everybody else. And so they have a capital city, and the capital city is just known for its corruption, its brutality. It's suspected that they're cannibals. It's definitely inferred that there's a lot of incest going on because only people who are blood, our married blood, can live in the palace and even can be servants in the palace. So even all of the servants, the kitchens, the cooks, the scrubbing the floors are somehow related to this royal family. So Yang is the daughter of the former princess of the Arameri who abdicated her position. She was the heir to the 100,000 kingdoms, and she abdicated her position in order to marry Yang's father, who was from a poor kingdom, which seems to be a matrilineal, sort of matriarchal, Amazon like society. The women are warriors, the men are the caretakers of the children, and they're a small, poor kingdom. And they become even more poor after Yang's mother abdicates her position because the other nations kind of, it's like Cuba, right? They sort of embargo them and won't trade with them, right? So it's a small, poor kingdom. So she is called to the capital city where she is told that she will be made an heir to the 100,000 kingdoms alongside two of her cousins. And basically, they have to fight it out for the throne. And these are all just like brutal, vicious, the Arameri are brutal, vicious people who will kill their relatives in a second. So that is the setup, right? And yeah, it's interesting because the direction the book ends up going in to me kind of different from what I expected of the setup. And I won't say too much about that so as not to give it away, but it becomes a lot more about the gods and the conflict that led to these gods being enslaved and the relationship that Yang develops with these beings as she tries to survive and as she tries to protect her kingdom, her father's kingdom, which starts to be targeted by her cousins who she's fighting for the throne. But yeah, really good, really good. And I'm very proud of myself for finishing it in a few days by just reading steadily. And so I'll come back to this trilogy when I talk about my TBR. Oh my gosh, this was supposed to be short. It's taking a really long time. I don't know who's going to listen to this. The last book I'm going to talk about is Wicked by Gregory Maguire. Now, this is my second time attempting to read Wicked. I read it about halfway through years ago before I ever saw the stage play. It might have been before the stage play came out. I really love dark, mature fairy tale retellings. I love that. I love that. I always seek books out like that. So I was so excited for this book. I remember finding it in the library and I remember trying to read it and thinking this is dry as hell. And At the time, this is before I saw the stage play, so I didn't have any particular, like, attachment to Elphaba or to the characters to where I just really wanted to see it through because I didn't have that attachment to the musical yet. So the library term ran out and I just turned it in. I was like, it's all right. So I came back to this. My last episode was about Wicked. I love the movie so much. I love the stage play. I've been seeing people talk about the differences to the book, and I've also been seeing people talk about how the second half of the film might possibly draw a little bit more on the novel and not just the stage play, because is there really enough story to tell for a whole second film without bringing in a little bit more of the novel? So I'm like, okay, well, let me read the book and see what's up. I think this is a really great book, but you cannot, if you are a fan of the musical and a fan of the movie, you need to put that aside to read this. It's slow, it's very character focused, it's very philosophical, it is not action driven, it is not heavily plot driven. It is a treatise on the nature of evil, of the nature of good and evil. There's a lot of complex political world building and things that are happening. Oz is not a utopia at all. It's actually a very oppressive state where a lot of people are greatly suffering. It's just a completely different thing. It's a thing of its own. And what happens is very different. I don't want to say too much about the differences because I know a lot of people are reading this right now and they may want to find out for themselves. But I just have to warn people to just be prepared for a very different kind of read. It's very sexual. It's so funny. So there's a scene in the movie where they all go to a party, like a dance, a Asta's ball. And that scene in the book is actually some of them, not Glinda, not Elphaba, but mostly the boys going to a sex show that involves live animals having sex with people. There's just a lot of wow stuff happening in this book. And it's so funny because the language is so sedate and so, I don't want to say dry because it didn't feel as dry to me when I read it this time. It's actually, I think, kind of beautifully written, but the language is so somber and matter of fact in tone that just completely wild shit will be happening before you realize that that's what's happening. I actually read and listened to this. I had the audiobook as well, so I was going back and forth. So I'll read it, then if I have to go clean or shop or do something, then I will listen to it. I actually really enjoyed the audiobook. I usually don't do fantasy on audio because I get confused. But actually, I really like the audiobook. And so there's just so many little weird sexual things happening and so much stuff you will miss if you aren't paying attention. I enjoyed it, and by the end, I was still trying to process because it is actually very sad. There is something that bothered me a lot. So Fiyero, right? Fiyero is the prince who Elphaba and Glinda both end up being in love with in the movie and the stage play. So that's kind of part of the tension between them is Fiyero. So not only does that not happen in the book, I'm gonna go ahead and get that away. Fiyero has a relationship with Elphaba, but not Glinda. But he's black. Fiyero is black. I mean, so I've seen people say he's South Asian coded. I've seen people say he's indigenous coded. He was described as dark brown with tribal markings on his face, and he is the prince of like this harsh mountainous region. So I don't know. To me, Fiyero was an African prince. But anyway, Fiero's not white. That's one thing we can say, that he is very of color, indigenous, maybe black, maybe South Asian, but he is coded as non-white. And there is a lot of racism towards him in the book. One of the characters says that his skin is the color of shit. I was like, wow, Gregory Maguire. I know that's not his perspective, it's the character, but I was like, wow. And Glinda at one point says, oh my God, he's dark skinned. I can never be with him. He's dark skinned. So yeah, there's quite a lot of racism, and there is something that happens to him and also happens to his people that I found really, 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 really troubling. So, yeah, y'all gotta read for yourselves to find out more, but definitely be prepared for a very different kind of read. I also felt like there were some loose threads hanging. There was a lot of chaos towards the end in terms of Elphaba and what she was trying to do, and I wasn't quite understanding So there were some questions that I felt like still needed to be answered. There are more books in the series. I'm not sure yet if I liked it enough that I'm going to try to go forward, but we'll see. Okay, let's talk about my TBR. Next, I probably won't finish this in a month of January, but at least by in the next couple of months, I would like to be finished the Inheritance trilogy. I have started reading the second book and I'm really enjoying it. I need to finish reading Out There Screaming, which is a horror anthology edited by Jordan Peele. I've already read a few of the stories and they were amazing. This is a heavy hitters. This is not emerge. I mean, maybe there are some emerging writers in here. There's actually a story, Erin Adams. I feel like she was also in the Black Girl Survives anthology. So I think there are some emerging writers, but a lot of these are heavy hitters. Nicole Sconier is a good friend of mine who's been publishing for a long time. Nnedi Okorafor is in here. N.K. Jemison is in here. I haven't read her story yet. Tamara Reeve Dew is in here. I have read that story. It was amazing. So I'm really excited to finally just like knock this one out. I've been skipping around, sort of reading different stories, but I'm excited to knock that one out. And I'm also working on a publication that's going to involve both this one and The Black Girl Survives. So I need to finish it. I am not absolutely sure this is the second book in the Amari Brother and the Night Brothers series, but BB Alstom's Amari and the Great Game. I want to finish this series, so I'm going to read this one. I've been trying to take a break from YA because I was finding so many of my YA reads just not very fulfilling, but I've had this for a while. I bought this a long time ago, Blood at the Root, Ladarian Williams. I said I want to start kind of reading more male authors and male protagonists. I feel like there's not a lot of like Black boys in fantasy. So I really want to support that, which is why I bought the book. And it's on my shelf. So I want to go ahead and read that because I want to start sort of clearing things off my shelf that I haven't read. So that's my TBR for the next couple of months. And yeah, I feel like there was more I wanted to say, but I'm going to stop there. You have just listened to the Merwomanist podcast with Mommy Melusine. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, I would love 5 stars, and subscribe for future episodes. You can follow me on Instagram at mommy, that's MAMI, _Melusine, or at Merwomanist Podcast, on LinkedIn at Jalandra Davis, or my website, jalandradavis.com. Wishing you love and laughter and hoping to see you swim this way again.